I am very proud to announce today that we have reached a deal to end the shutdown and reopen the federal government.
Well, after 35 days, the partial government shutdown is over. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm Jenna Browder.
And I'm John Jessup. Well, in an afternoon Rose Garden speech, the president announced he plans to sign a continuing resolution to reopen the government until mid-February.
That's right. CBN News White House correspondent Ben Kennedy joins us for more. Ben, why now, and what type of pressure did the president feel to make this deal?
Well, Jenna and John, this all began after the two bills failed in the Senate Thursday. Then this morning, a ground stop at LaGuardia Airport after not enough staff showed up to work to handle air traffic control kicked things really into high gear. Lawmakers and the president were warned this partial shutdown could impact airspace, and it did today. President Trump and congressional leaders reached a tentative deal to reopen the government for 3 weeks, and in the meantime, continued talks to tackle the issue of $5.7 billion for the U.S.-Mexico border wall. Trump spoke directly to Democrats, saying, "This is our best chance to get a deal that's a win-win for both of us." He then turned his focus to the 800,000 federal workers who missed a second paycheck Friday.
I want to thank all of the incredible federal workers and their amazing families who have shown such extraordinary devotion in the face of this recent hardship. You are fantastic people. You are incredible patriots. Many of you have suffered far greater than anyone but your families would know or understand.
And a bit of good news, the president said the federal workers will get back pay very quickly and as soon as possible. John, Jenna?
Ben, as I understand, this is just a short-term solution. So what happens if in 21 days we don't have a deal?
Well, John, that's a great question. The president said that if he doesn't get a fair deal from Congress, the government will either shut down on February 15th again, or he will declare a national emergency at the border to lock in the money needed to build a wall. He said that we have no choice but to build a wall or a steel barrier. Now, it's not the route he wants to take, which is why he reopened the government for 3 weeks, hoping that is enough time to compromise so both sides can walk away with a win.
Thanks, Ben.
And we are joined now by senior Washington correspondent Jennifer Wishon. Jennifer, you know, President Trump, there's quite a bit of mixed reaction. He's been getting a lot of criticism from people on the far right, like the Ann Coulters.
Sure.
Do you think that's warranted? Did he have any other option?
Well, he always had an option, but I think, you know, as Ben said, when those airplanes were grounded today, you know, President Trump is a businessman. He knows the cost of that. He understands that that looked really bad for him. He's a New Yorker, too. Mm-hmm. So I think that really was kind of the final straw. It put a lot of pressure on him because, I mean, just 2 days ago, the president was in a meeting with conservative leaders at the White House where he was feeling emboldened to stay the course. So I think that really did it. You know, you were mentioning, you know, kind of hard right conservatives giving him a hard time, Ann Coulter basically calling him a coward. Of course, Democrats reacting, saying, look, you're giving us exactly what we wanted. And then other people saying, give it some time. This is just part of his art of the deal.
No matter how you look at that, though, this is not something that the president ever wanted to do. It appears as though, as you know, Chuck Schumer came out right away after the president made his statement saying that this is exactly what we've been asking for all along. This is the longest shutdown on record. Poll numbers just weren't helping the president at all. So this really was a major, if not just a temporary loss for the president.
Well, I mean, we know from the beginning, John, the president said, I would be happy to shut down the government to, you know, to secure the border. And so he has owned this from the beginning. You're right. That was all putting pressure on him. But I think the most important line of what the president said today was the very end, where he said, look, if by February 15th, Congress has not given me a deal that I think is good, the government's going to shut down again, or I'm going to use my powers as president to do what I think needs to be done anyway. And again, going back to that meeting with conservative leaders, I can tell you, talking to some people who were in that room, they encouraged the president to aggressively use all the power at his disposal because they feel like they have been hoodwinked by Republicans for decades when it comes to immigration from Reagan on, and they feel like this is their chance to really do something substantial at the border.
Jennifer, the president mentioned putting together a bipartisan committee to negotiate, to come up with some sort of agreement. If they don't reach this agreement by February 15th, what happens then? And do you think, what are the odds that he will get that $5.7 billion for the border wall?
Well, that's a good question. I do think that this commission, kind of guided by Homeland Security. Basically, they're going to bring in the experts. That's what they wanted to do. And I think that gives Democrats and Republicans some cover because they can say, look, these are the Border Patrol agents. They're telling us this is what they need. So it's our job to help them achieve that. So I think in some ways it gives them some cover. I know our colleague David Brody has said he thought that it could come to this. Will he get all of the money? I don't know. But I think the president can't walk away from the table politically until he has done something so that in 2020 he can say, look, the wall is right here. I mean, he has to walk away with something tangible from this, or it is a major failure.
It's a cornerstone of his campaign.
Absolutely.
Jennifer, thanks so much for that.
Thank you.
Well, as we've been reporting on Faith Nation, at the core of the shutdown is the president's pledge to get the funding for a border wall with Mexico. Even after the partial shutdown ends, the fight over border security will continue well into the future. Ben Kennedy joins us again for that story. Ben?
Well, John, here's what it all comes down to. As Jennifer was just talking about, the president and many members of the GOP want a border wall. But Democrats say, yeah, not so fast. Migrants continue to pour into the U.S. seeking asylum.
We're fighting to, for a better future.
That future begins at a port of entry. Border agents argue they are understaffed and holding areas at capacity, creating long lines and forcing some to wait for weeks to get in. And not everyone comes to the U.S. for a better life. The border has become a pipeline for illegal drugs, gangs, and human traffickers. Which is why then candidate Trump made building a border wall the backbone of his campaign.
I will never, ever back down.
Yes, we do have a crisis at the border.
The border with Mexico is roughly 1,900 miles long, spanning 4 states: California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. Trump recently visited the Lone Star State to see firsthand what he calls a crisis. Aside from a $5 billion wall, Trump wants money for humanitarian aid, additional personnel, and new drug detection technology.
Technology is great. It's always that added situational awareness, but we're always going to need boots on the ground.
Democrats support more agents, but stop short of giving the president a dime for the wall.
It embodies the president's temper tantrum. If you don't do it my way, I'm shutting down the government and hurting lots of people.
Trump did admit that Mexico won't be paying up front for the wall, but maintains the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade deal would cover the funding.
Mexico is paying for the wall indirectly. And when I said Mexico will pay for the wall in front of thousands and thousands of people, obviously they're not going to write a check.
Now, President Trump says aside from his demands for the wall, it's also what U.S. Customs and Border agents are telling him is needed to protect the U.S. from criminal elements. John?
And joining us now is Chief Political Analyst David Brody to discuss the battle over the border. Yeah. This has been a point of contention, really a point of division that dates all the way back to 2015, 2016, the president's launch of his presidential campaign.
That's right, June 2015, John. That's where it started. And honestly, a lot of his critics, and I'm pulling up a piece of paper, leave it to me to have a note.
What have you got there?
Well, I have his quote from what he said in June of 2015, and this is the quote that set everything off. And he said, basically, he said, when Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. And then he said, they're not sending you, they said they have lots of problems. They're bringing those problems with us. They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime. Then he says at the end, and some I assume are good people. A qualifier at the end. But the point simply is that that line became, in essence, the marching orders, if you will, throughout the whole campaign. And it just kept growing and growing. So there is some self-inflicted damage right from the start here.
Well, that line it seems to express why Democrats have been so entrenched by saying that the wall is immoral. But you see a lot of opponents of the president and this wall seem to suggest that this notion of building a wall is based around racism. Where's that rooted?
Right. Well, there's a couple things going on. First of all, this whole idea of racism, it's a very lazy argument to make. I mean, look what happened with the Covington kids, right? The Covington High School kids,
From
the Catholic
Kentucky,
kids,
right.
right? You have a Make America Great Again hat on, you're white, you're Catholic, you support Trump, and boom, all of a sudden you're air quote racist, which of course they had to dial all of that back. And this is what's part of the problem. Look, over 30%, roughly 30% of Hispanics in America voted for Donald Trump in 2016, more than Mitt Romney got, more than George W. Bush got. The point simply is that there are folks within the Hispanic community, record numbers actually, that like the fact that there's record unemployment in their communities as well. So to say that he is just this racist is obviously ridiculous. I've said that many times. But I don't think he helps himself with some of the blunt language that could be tempered a whole lot better.
And as you've pointed out several times before, border security has been a bipartisan issue for decades. So I want to ask you real quickly about the midterm elections. Yeah. President Trump drilled down on border security, talking about the caravan of migrants. Mm-hmm. Do you think that helped or hurt in the 2018 midterm elections?
Yeah, it probably ended up just helping him, only because, you know, folks vote typically out of emotion and anger, and that riles up the base.
Sure.
So I think it was a pretty easy play that you're going to do that. But let's not kid ourselves. Democrats do that as well, whether it be on health care. Remember what Barack Obama did, and I'm not saying it was anything from an anger perspective, but it's definitely emotional. You know, this idea that they're going to take your health care away. I mean, look what the abortion, the folks that are on the pro-choice side do all the time. You know, they're going to make you go to back alleys and have abortions there, and I know they believe that. But at the same time, they're provoking fear and using emotion to create a divisive nature in this country. Both sides do it, John.
We've got about 50 seconds left.
Oh, gosh.
The border has been responsible for the longest government shutdown on record. Mm-hmm. How much do you think that this will be a factor in 2020?
100%. Let me rephrase that. 150%.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Because it's not going to go away, no matter what happens. You know, I know the whole shutdown situation that we've been seeing play out. Look, the bottom line is this is an issue that provokes both sides. Yes, the economy is important and all of that, but the bottom line is that both sides are going to use this, and that's why Nancy Pelosi has been digging in all this time as well. She knows it plays well to the progressive left, and you have to motivate your base in 2020. Both sides think they can motivate their base. The question is, which base will be motivated the most?
Even more.
Even more. But this border wall / security / divisiveness is all going to play out right in front of our eyes in 2020. It's really unfortunate, but it's going to happen.
Well, we will have to just wait and see how bad it probably will get. David Brody, thank you for always for your insight.
Anytime.
Yeah.
Thanks.
When we come back, we'll look at a reason that is bringing both Democrats and Republicans together each week. Though the current climate on Capitol Hill sees sharp divisions between Republicans and Democrats, Senator Ben Sasse of Nebraska tells CBN News it's important for Christian lawmakers to keep in mind those across the aisle are more than just political foes.
Yeah, so I differ with Democrats on really important policy matters, but my disagreement with a Democrat about whether or not the minimum wage will actually help poor people, I don't think it will. That's a debate that people can reasonably have, but that's not a core identity issue for me, and it shouldn't be for any Christian. And so I want to work really hard to treat my neighbor in a debate as somebody who has an eternal soul and that God created, and that if I debate this person on a policy issue, I want to make sure it doesn't compromise my witness.
And Sasse says people need to remember their identity is more than their political beliefs. And some lawmakers are living that out each week.
As Abigail Robertson reports, they gather to put aside their differences and look to the one who unifies them.
It is literally the most liberal Democrats and the most conservative Republicans. It's not just, the centrist group.
Democratic Senator Chris Coons, who leads the group with Republican Senator James Lankford, tells CBN News it's the best hour of his week.
We do two things we don't otherwise do. We listen to each other, and we trust each other.
The only non-senator present is Senate Chaplain Barry Black. Each week, a different senator is picked to share a message to the group.
Because what you're sharing is exactly what an opposition research guy would love to know in your next campaign. Your weakness. How have you fallen short? What's been difficult about your childhood, about your marriage, about your public service, these aren't just sort of easy two-dimensional. These are folks really sharing of themselves.
They close each meeting holding hands in prayer. Coons says friendships made in the prayer group have helped improve his working relationships with members.
Look, it is really tough to throw a punch, at least verbally, on the floor of the Senate or in an interview when that morning you were holding hands in prayer. And that's powerful. That's important.
From your perspective being here, do you feel like Washington is as divided as it feels like on the news?
Yes. I'll tell you that the thing that's easy to miss is that we've got some incredibly smart and capable and motivated senators who all came here intending to make the country better. Yet we find it awfully hard to compromise.
One of the trends hurting relationships on the Hill is a lack of social interaction because lawmakers don't live here anymore.
A generation or two ago, all senators moved their families here. And so they knew each other as parents on the edge of a soccer or baseball field, as much as they knew each other as, combatants on the Senate floor.
Coons says one of his best friends and mentors here is someone with whom he shares no political views. Republican Senator Johnny Isakson of Georgia.
If you're willing to do the work, if you're willing to, travel together, meet each other's families, spend time listening, you can build amazing relationships here.
He admits, though, some take a long time to heal, such as the recent Supreme Court confirmation of Justice Brett Kavanaugh.
There was a particularly heated exchange with Senator Graham, who I have traveled with, I've legislated with. I'm fairly close to Senator Graham. And that was a particularly hard moment for me.
A week later, Graham reached out to Coons with an invitation to meet with Jared Kushner and hear the administration's plan for peace in the Middle East. He admitted it took a few days of consideration before finally accepting.
And I came home and, my wife said, "What are you doing meeting with Lindsey Graham?" And I said, "Honey, I'm still mad about the Kavanaugh hearings. Don't get me wrong. I'm still upset about that. But it was a meeting about peace." And, my job is to figure out a way to keep working with Senator Graham on the things that we share and we care about and are important to our country.
Coons hopes in time they can overcome the past and reconcile.
It is hard. It is not easy to get over some of the fights we have here. But that's what I think the people of Delaware hired me to do, is to stick to principle on issues of core principle, but work across the aisle and find ways to respect each other and work together.
A strong motivation for Coons to restore relationships is his awareness that the world is watching.
And in dozens of countries around the world, they look at the Senate and they look at the Congress and they look at the United States and they say democracy doesn't work. That's bad. So I remind my colleagues, look, folks, it's not just our kids who are watching. It's our kids, it's the rest of the world, and it's history. And we have to show that this is the best way to resolve conflict peaceably and that we can really solve those problems that the average American wants us to tackle.
Coons tells me he hopes this divided Congress can force both parties to compromise on major issues that Americans are ready to see resolved. Reporting from Washington, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
Coming up, how the church should be responding to the political division in America.
Between immigration, taxes, abortion, and climate change, Americans are increasingly finding fewer areas of agreement.
The dividing line appears to have even found its way to the church. So what role do Christians play in following God's command to bind up the divisive wounds and build unity?
That's the question I put to Bishop Harry Jackson. Bishop Jackson, you were here the day after the midterm elections on Faith Nation, talking about the need for the country to unite.
Yes.
How has the country done since November at unity?
Not so well. I would give them a D+.
D+?
Yeah, meaning there are some lingo that says we need to unify. But every time you say United States of America, I think right now it's almost like a prophetic declaration. We're calling those things which be not, as though they were.
Yep.
But I think our disunity really stems from the fact that Alexis de Tocqueville years ago said that America is great because she is moral And when she stops being moral or good, because she's good, then she will no longer be great. And I feel as though what's happened is that there is an attempt to make our nation secular. And therefore, every other religion other than Christianity is celebrated because folks believe that we, the Christian community, have a set of values that they need to be freed from. And so I think the battle over Christian values or not creates a realm of disunity. If you have the same moral standards, it's easier to begin to say we're going to be unified. Think about it this way. Every law is an expression of our collective morality. And therefore, we're not getting much legislation done recently, if you noticed. And that's because we can't decide on what's right. And if you look at the two parties, the Democrats and Republicans, Democrats have a justice orientation if you look through all their platforms.
Sure.
But justice without Jesus is just us. It has no value. And then the Republican platform really has a righteousness orientation, but righteousness that has no relational connection with Jesus, once again, is a problem. So we've got these ideological perspectives. We say limited government is good, but there's a role for government. We say government should bring a sense of fairness and justice, but if my sense of morality is really anchored in humanism, I really don't have morality. So we're trying to figure out at this point what America's raison d'etre, as the French say, is.
Let me ask you real quickly, how does division amongst Americans make us more vulnerable as a nation?
In spiritual places, the devil wants to bring disunity. Disunity fragments our power. The Bible says 1 would put 1,000 to flight, 2, 10,000, and you go on, 3 would put 100,000 to flight. So there's amplified power. If 2 shall agree as touching anything, it shall be done of them by my Father which is in heaven. So what you find, the spirit of anarchy, if I can use that phraseology, is pressing in on America because we're at the threshold of a defining moment, and it's trying to say, black, white, whatever nationality you're from, you're not getting a fair shake. It's trying to say male, female. The Me Too movement is a justice movement. And unless Christians lead the way in saying, here's how we're going to unify. By the way, there's more of us than anybody else. So here's our standard. We're going to see the enemies fragmenting, dividing to bring a lack of identity, and then most importantly to me, a lack of spiritual power.
How do Christians lead the way in the phrase that you just mentioned if evangelicals in today's media cycle are often pinned or seen as the cause of division within society?
Well, I think we've got to go back to the hard work that I wrote a book some years ago with George Barna. It's called High Impact African American Churches. And in our study, we said these things black churches are doing that all churches should do. The black churches of yesteryear would do community outreach to gain a hearing. They'd do good, they'd serve the poor. If you look at every list of reasons why millennials and lower in age don't want to go to church, they say, you're not doing anything for the poor, you're not doing anything to help the community, you're just talking down to us and telling us what to do. So we've got to go back to earning the right to be heard. It's pre-evangelism, really. So I need to do good work to identify with hurt and then speak our truth, not as correction, but help.
So plenty of work for the church to do and a conversation that we don't often hear very much reported on. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you, John.
Bishop Harry Jackson with Hope Christian Church. And always, Bishop Harry Jackson always has many words of wisdom.
Yeah, great interview.
Yep.
Well, that does it for Faith Nation.
Have a great night.